Hi, Peter Burgess here from the SMSF Association. We're really pleased to be releasing some new research which shows that an SMSF with a balance of $200,000 can achieve comparable investment returns with larger funds. So self-managed super funds achieve critical mass at balances of $200,000. So this really does challenge the notion that self-managed super funds require a minimum balance of $500,000 to achieve investment returns comparable with larger funds.
The biggest opportunity for the industry is efficiency in data. Where we see efficiency in data, we will see the reduction of costs. And further to that, when we see reduction in costs, it will open up the marketplace to a larger number of customers who will be able to use self-managed super funds.
So welcome and thanks for joining today's webinar, A Time for Growth, Trend Shaping SMSF. My name's Tori Starkey and I'm very pleased to welcome our industry experts that will be joining us here today. Meg Heffron, Peter Burgess and Tim Steele. So our industry experts will be discussing the latest trends driving growth in the SMSF industry. Tim most recently joined Class as CEO. He has a wealth of executive experience working with financial professionals to deliver customer-centric solutions. Most recently, Tim was Group Executive, Retirement and Investment Solutions at MLC after joining NAB as General Manager of Financial Planning. And prior to that, Tim was Managing Director of IPAC and Genesis Wealth Advisors. He's also got a wealth of experience consulting to large financial services companies on growth and transformation strategies. So welcome, Tim. We also have Meg Heffron, Managing Director of Heffron Consulting. Many of you will know Meg. She's been working exclusively in SMSF since 1998. She is one of the very few actuaries to work in all areas of SMSF practice, and her passion is turning technical knowledge about SMSFs into practical solutions that accountants and advisors can use to help their clients and also grow their business. She is a trusted source in the development and implementation of superannuation policy by government and regulators. So we're very lucky to have Meg join us today. And Peter Burgess, who's the Deputy CEO and Director of Policy Education at the SMSF Association. So Peter is a previous association board member and worked at the association as Technical Director prior to joining Super Concepts as General Manager, Technical Services and Education. He has over 20 years of industry experience and is recognised as an authority in SMSF technical matters and government policy design. So thank you, Peter, Meg and Tim for joining us today. We're very fortunate to have you. Before we kick off, to let you all know, we'll be leveraging the Class Annual SMSF Benchmark Report as a resource. You should have received your own personal copy this morning via email. If not, it is available to download via the Class website as well. So to get us started today, experts will provide their unique perspective on our industry as well as key challenges and opportunities. And this is going to be followed by a panel discussion as well as Q&A. So please feel free to add your questions to the Q&A box during the session, and we'll get to those during the panel discussion. So to kick us off, Tim's going to get us started to share his perspective, obviously as Class's new CEO, on the report and our industry. So over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Tori, and welcome everyone. And thank you for making the time to join us today. It is wonderful to be here as the recently appointed CEO of Class in such esteemed company as Meg and Peter, and almost embarrassed to be positioned as an expert alongside both of them. I'm in week 3 in my role at Class and feel very fortunate that the timing coincided with the release of what is our second annual benchmark report, and one that we think plays a very important role in sharing timely insights with our key partners and customers to help shed a light on what is such a profoundly important industry and the role that SMSF plays in supporting Australians to live ultimately a dignified retirement. There are a number of insights that come from the report, and we'll draw out some of the threads of that from our various perspectives as well as the Q&A. But there are three key themes that I wanted to touch on. And one relates to obviously the resilience and continued growth that we're seeing in SMSFs, the interesting shifts we're seeing in gender contributions and member balances. And then we know this is an area of interest for many of our customers and accountant partners, and that is a deep dive into the growth of what we're seeing with respect to ETFs. And so they're sort of the themes that I'm going to cover off, and then I'll obviously hand over to Peter and Meg for their insights. Market conditions that we're seeing at the moment, it has been a turbulent year and certainly a turbulent last few months, as we've seen particularly the market respond to sort of global issues and Ukraine conflict and continued sort of increasing interest rate environment with sort of almost hyperinflationary periods. And so I think what has in fact demonstrated through the performance of SMSFs based on our data is that balances were down in Q2 5% compared to a broader market of the ASX 200 of 12% during the period. So that in itself, in terms of a resilience, I think is a really interesting perspective. It is important to note, and it would be inappropriate not to note, that clearly we know that property is a popular asset class in SMSFs, and there may be a lag to valuations on property. And also, as we see interest rate environments move, we would expect continued potential volatility and impact in property. It's not our job to predict where that might go, clearly, but it is worth noting that property, obviously, as you would be well aware, is a popular asset class, and the valuation may be affected over time. What is really exciting to note, and we'll talk about some of the demographics that come through in the report in terms of the age where we're seeing interesting growth, is that overall, SMSFs have grown by 4.7% to a record number of 605,000, which I think, again, we've seen over periods, different experiences, but I think more recently, certainly, SMSFs are very popular. What we're pleasing to see is we're trying to continue to address what we know is sort of a more societal sort of experience and shift, is where women are taking greater responsibility and accountability for financial decisions in households, but also as we're seeing greater return work participation rates, higher increasing engagement, understanding of the role and importance of super. We are inching, and I don't want to overstate this, but we are inching towards where we need to get to, obviously, which is parity between genders or gender balance with respect to superannuation balances. So we've seen that grow from what was 80% of average male balances to 84%. And again, we know that is an improving trend in the role of obviously females and contributing more actively into their super. And we've seen obviously that with respect to downsizer contributions and some of the regulatory enhancements there and a capacity to do that earlier, along with improving participation rates. And obviously we can see 40% participation rates over 85. ETFs is the area that I know, again, is of interest. This has grown the highest growth amongst all asset classes, with a 5% growth from June 2020. And I think where we're seeing, if you can see that whilst they look, in terms of the total size, we talk about a 3% increase, particularly for millennials, doesn't sound particularly significant. But if you think about that as an increase from what was sort of circa 7% to just over 10% for that age group of 35 to 44, that is a really material increase, we think, in that particular segment that we wanted to call out. And then obviously we're seeing, we think, competitive advantage for potentially ETFs, looking at the broader market to enable people to think about their diversification strategy. So we see this as a key component of overall diversification strategy, particularly in those Gen Z and millennial segments where we've seen reasonable growth. And we know that, we're seeing significant number of millennials actually being the fastest growing area of growth for us in SMSF establishments. We think that, total overall establishments are up from what was 233 in FY 2018 to 12,413 in FY 21. That younger cohort, and there's a fair bit of, we know, contention in the industry around what is the right threshold, either age or balance or other behavioural elements that might be of interest to people. And we know that the average age for SMSF establishments has reduced from in 2006 to 2014 was 51 years, and between 2020 and 2022, that is now down to an average age of 46. So there is, obviously, people are considering and actually establishing SMSFs earlier in their life, which we think obviously is a positive sign. It's significant, I think, in terms of interest engagement in super, and obviously SMSFs as a chosen superannuation structure. Recently, you may have seen the SMSF Association published some research that was conducted by the University of Adelaide that looked at the threshold of sort of relevant performance, and it was showcased in the video that Peter spoke in that talked about this threshold of $200,000. We obviously are aware of ASIC's reg guidance with respect to the $500,000 threshold limit, and I think, Peter, I'd be interested in your reflections and how you see that obviously that $200,000 limit's applying and playing out in terms of ultimately younger demographics establishing and showing greater interest in SMSFs earlier in life.
Yes, thanks very much, Tim, and thank you also for the opportunity to be part of today's panel. Look, I think, well, as the peak body, first of all, representing the self-managed super fund sector, we believe all individuals should have the option of choosing their desired level of investment flexibility and engagement that they want with their retirement savings. And when we visit Canberra and we speak to the major political parties about self-managed super funds, it is encouraging and pleasing to know that they understand the importance of the self-managed super fund sector and the role that the sector is playing in providing that choice. Like Tim, we are very upbeat and very optimistic about the future of the self-managed super fund sector. As Tim mentioned earlier this year, in conjunction with the University of Adelaide, we did release some research on the investment performance of the SMSF sector. And it was quite revealing and groundbreaking, if you like, this research, because it was really the first time that we've been able to calculate investment returns for the SMSF sector using the same calculation methodology that APRA uses to calculate returns for APRA regulated funds. So by using data from 318,000 self-managed super funds, so it's a massive data sample, more than 50% of the entire SMSF population, and a call out and thank you to CLASS for the major contribution that they made to the data. So the university was able to calculate an investment return using that same methodology that APRA uses for the 2017, 18 and 19 years. That was the most up-to-date data we had when this research was done. And the results were really quite revealing. As you can see in this table, and this is my favourite table from the research, what it shows is that the performance of an SMSF typically improves as the balance approaches $200,000. And once it hits that threshold, it essentially flatlines after that. So what that's saying is that the performance of a fund that has $200,000 was very similar to the performance of the fund with much larger balances. And this really turns on its head this notion that $500,000 is the minimum amount required to make an SMSF viable, and Tim referred to ASIC, the ASIC website, where they do refer to that 500,000 figure. If you just press enter there, if that was true, then you would expect to see a break at that $500,000 threshold. And you can see there is absolutely no break there, which is flatlining, and the relevant threshold is $200,000. So just pressing enter again, you can see in that range 200 to 500, essentially the balance is making no difference to the performance of the fund. And this has been quite groundbreaking findings, we feel. Together with the Rice Warner research that we released back in 2020 on the operating costs of a self-managed super fund, this really turns on its head this notion, and it really is changing the narrative around the minimum amount of capital required to establish a self-managed super fund. Now, we all know there are many factors that come into play when determining whether a self-managed super fund is right for a client, and the required amount of capital is just one of those factors. But what this research is showing is that it is an important factor because you can see if you've got less than $200,000, your performance is compromised in a self-managed super fund. So it's probably a good opportunity to bring Meg into the conversation. We have seen recently the ATO release some statistics around the number of self-managed super funds, and it appears that for the first time we've gone past the 600,000 threshold. And given that we've seen a bit of a surge in establishments, Meg, is that an indication of the health of the sector, or are there other factors at play here?
Yeah, look, I think there are probably always a couple of factors at play or to look at when you're thinking about how healthy the sector is. Certainly the number of funds is one. I've always found the number of funds a slightly tricky number to quantify because you know, like I do, Peter, the ATO is always a little bit behind when it comes to knowing how many funds have wound up. So we know how many get established and we know how many there were last year, but knowing exactly how many there are today is always a tricky question. So whether we really have burst through the 600,000 magic barrier, I don't know. But certainly the fact that the numbers are steadily increasing is a good sign, I think. The other number that I like to focus on as a sign of health is sort of picks up a little bit on your points and also harks back to one of the stats that Tim quoted, which is how old people are when they set them up. Because what we're seeing at the moment, Tim picked up a stat that said that, 5 year or back in 2014, I think the average age at establishment was something like 51. Now it's down to 46. So what that says to me is people are getting interested in an SMSF earlier in life. Now that's got to be a good thing. That suggests that as an industry, we're making them more accessible. We're bringing the costs down. We're making them, more attractive to people at a younger age. And when you consider that, eventually even if in a 2-member fund, when both members die, probably that fund will be wound up. There's a guaranteed exit path. It's nice to see the entry point getting younger. I think that speaks a lot to the health of the sector.
Fantastic. So I think we have heard a lot, even today, about the new sweet spot for SMSF balances to be competitive with much larger funds. So I'd love to hear from each of you how you see this actually changing the market. And Tim, maybe if we start with you, because I know Hub24 has spotted this trend and have been working on a solution to target those new customer segments. Can you maybe share your perspectives on it?
Yeah, I'm happy to touch on. I mean, Hub24, we have obviously a very unique relationship. They acquired Class in February this year, for those who may not be aware, and that brings together some really interesting collective capability across our two organisations. They are effectively a partner of ours, and we're providing support to them as they look to roll out a proposition targeted, they believe, specifically at millennials, with a view of thinking about how can we collectively grow the total market as SMSFs. And so they've got effectively an end-to-end service bringing together SMSF establishment, admin, and investment administration that leverages some of their investment capability from their platform and tries to put some guardrails in place with respect to that as well, which I think is important when you think about that potential segment of the population. And look, we're going to go to market and test that. They're going to go to market and test that in the months ahead. So it's early days. Our objective in supporting them in doing that as a partner is obviously we think if we can bring awareness and help grow the market, that there will come a natural juncture where those assets and or the complexity of the circumstances for those trustees gets to a point where they need professional advice and support. And so they will turn to accountants and administrators to help them do that. And so this is a strategy quite deliberately to help us think about how do we grow the overall market, given what we're seeing with some of the macro trends in terms of that segment looking to SMSF as a potential superannuation structure.
Peter, Meg, any thoughts on impact to the market overall?
Yeah, look, I think anything that I guess gets the message out there that SMSFs can be both cost effective and highly attractive at lower balances is valuable to most of us on the call. And I think, and probably, in a way, the recent research and, softening of ASIC's stance is probably speaks to something that most of us in this industry probably already knew, that there are plenty of cost-effective SMSFs out there at vastly lower balances than $500,000. I think possibly a change I'd like to see that I think will make will sort of make it easier for this sector to continue to thrive is we still have quite a bit of negative messaging about, an SMSF's not for everybody, they're complicated, they're risky, all those kinds of things. And I think probably a lot of us on this call could count on one hand the number of clients who've really seriously got themselves into trouble. So, I'd love to see us in an environment where advisors and accountants feel permissioned to say, yeah, sure. There are extra things that you need to be aware of, compliance obligations you have, hoops to jump through even, but that doesn't mean it's suddenly incredibly complicated. I still think the message around complexity is overplayed. I don't know. What do you think about that, Peter?
Yeah, look, I'd agree with that, Meg. I think, a question that we often get asked is, do we expect the proportion of SMSF to grow as a proportion of the overall superannuation industry? So the SMSF sector sits at around 30%, or just under 30% of the total superannuation assets. Do we expect to see that increase? Well, I suspect it probably will come down slightly over the next decade. And the main reason for that, I think, is we will start to see some of these mega funds start to leave the industry. So some of these SMSFs that have $50 million and $100 million, that money will start to come out of the sector with the introduction, of course, of the transfer balance cap and the other caps. It's inevitable that money will come out at some stage, and it won't be replenished or replaced with funds with balances of that size because of the contribution caps and things we have in place now. So I think over time, in terms of the growth of the sector, it will come down a little, I think, from that 30% mark that are currently sitting at. But I think it's fair to say that there will still be strong demand for self-managed super funds. We're seeing that as the report has found amongst younger demographics. So we will we'll see more funds, we will see more SMSF investors, but the proportion of those assets will be a little less, I think, than what we've got today in terms of the overall superannuation pool.
Thinking about that, Peter, you're probably right, that legislatively, because we're forced to take money out when everybody dies, we'll see the total quantum of super actually fall. It's just we'll only see that reflected in SMSFs, probably because that's where the big balances sit. I wonder whether we sort of look at two things when we look at how big is the SMSF sector. We look at the amount of money in it and the number of funds. And I wonder if we'll see number of funds growing, but amount of money shrinks for exactly that reason you're talking about, mega funds taking their, the members die and the money comes out. We've probably still got, many years, might see us out, Pete. We might finish our working lives before that really starts to bite.
I think you're right, yeah.
So we've got some fantastic questions coming through from our audience as well. So I might just throw to David McRae's question. So as an accountant, a client walks in and asks for an SMSF. Do I need to turn them away if they don't have a statement of advice or don't want one?
Yes, look, I'll start with that if you like. I think that's a question as to whether they can give a recommendation or are they licensed to provide any advice. Of course, if they don't hold a license to give personal advice, well, then they're not able to provide a recommendation unless they have that limited license. If it's execution only, if you like, if the client has made that decision to set up a self-managed super fund, it's a different situation. But we just got to be very careful in those scenarios that the accountant is not perceived to be the one that's providing that recommendation to set up a self-managed super fund if they're not licensed to do that. Meg, I don't know if you've got any views on that?
So I agree with I totally agree with you there, Peter. I think one of the things that's interesting is, again, I'm banging on about this theme of younger people getting into them. My anecdotal or observational comment there would be a lot of the younger people that we're seeing coming along now, the people who come to us directly are quite young, 20s, 30s, not even 40s and 50s. And they've done their research. So they're not remotely interested in someone telling them whether they want whether they should have an SMSF or not. They've actually already done their research and they know exactly what they want. And in a way, it feels a little patronising to me to say, oh, are you sure you want an SMSF? You know, it's extra risk and extra hard, especially since I don't honestly believe for somebody who is engaged and interested and has a decent sized balance that it's particularly hard. And you know, that's what those of us on this call are paid to do, make it easy. So yeah, I would hate to think that we suddenly started second guessing ourselves on whether we can do what a client has instructed us to do and set them up with a fund.
Great. So just jumping back again to the conversation around growth. So obviously there are differing perspectives on just how big the SMSF industry could grow with changes to super guarantees, some of the demographic shifts that we've already discussed, as well as preferences as well. I guess just that innate desire for more control. So it'd be really interesting to hear your perspective on just how big the industry can get. And Michael Lorimer, in a similar question, also asked what would increasing the SMSF market share look like from the ATO's perspective as well. So Peter, we might start with you before getting Meg and Tim's perspective.
Yeah, so I sort of touched on some of that previously, but in terms of how big we think the sector will grow, the size in terms of assets we think will probably come down in terms of an overall proportion of the superannuation sector because of those mega funds that I keep referring to coming out of the system. But there's no doubt that there will be strong demand for SMSFs going forward. So we'll continue to see new SMSFs established and an increase in the number of SMSF investors. But the actual value of the assets invested in SMSFs, we may see a reduction in that over time. I think that was the first part of the question.
I would weigh in, Tori. I think I've got a slightly different, albeit perhaps acknowledged, self-serving view of that I actually think there's the potential for us to see quite a material shift in growth in the total number of funds. I completely agree with Peter's comments and Meg built on this earlier in relation to, you know, the realities of what's happening demographically as people age. We'll see people die, balances will come out of SMSFs. But if you think about the other trend that Meg referred to is these 20-somethings, 30-somethings, directly having made the decision that they want an SMSF, it's completely consistent with what we're seeing in the broader market around consumer behaviour relating, wanting to control choice. There's almost this anti-institutional sentiment that exists. And so people saying, look, how do I take control of what is ultimately going to be my second largest, if not largest asset, depending on my circumstances? And so I think, and we hope that this trend will continue, again, in the right way for the right people with the right interest. And there is a potential hypothesis that says, actually, you end up with sort of two significant bookends from a superannuation industry perspective. At one end, it's impossible to deny the continued growth and emergence of industry super funds. And you know, there's some evidence to suggest that some of those mega funds are going to hit $1 trillion by 2040. Well, another bookend, I think, could quite conceivably be SMSFs, where you see this, you know, change in consumer behaviour ultimately driving a quite material growth in the number of SMSF funds. And today we obviously have, again, whether we've passed the 600,000 members fund threshold or not is still to be confirmed, but 605,000 is around the number. 1 million members representing 5% of total number of members in the industry, over 25%, close to 30% of the assets. You know, what would need to change in order for it to be actually 3, 4 or 5 million funds? What would need to materially change in the industry for that to be the sort of step change we see?
Meg,
related to
comments?
that, and related to that, Tim, I think one of Michael's questions was, what would that mean for the ATO? I think a much bigger budget. Because obviously the ATO doesn't care how much money is in funds, they care how many funds they have to regulate. So the more members, the more funds is obviously a big deal for them. I like your hypothesis there, Tim, about, you know, maybe we have two bookends. I think the retail super sector has filled a really valuable role, in my view, in forcing the SMSF sector to continue innovating, and vice versa. I think there's been a bit of a symbiotic relationship there. You know, if I think back to when I first started working with SMSFs, there were loads of strategies you could only implement in an SMSF. Industry funds were very minor then. Loads of strategies you could implement in an SMSF, not in a retail fund. Then retail funds got better, I think largely because they're trying to keep up and compete with SMSFs. That's great. That then forced people who work in SMSFs to think, you know, what else could people do with their super? I think one of the barriers to getting to that 3 million, Tim, is maybe simply it's you know, reputational damage that's been done already to SMSFs. I think a lot of people in the comments and questions are sort of commenting on, yeah, there does seem to be a lot of negativity, has been a lot of negativity around SMSFs that I feel is slowly going away. Now, if that goes away, it'll be really interesting to see where we settle. Maybe we will see, exactly as Tim said, the two bookends. And I think we might find that those of us who work with SMSFs all the time and know some of the benefits will be a little bolder about explaining what they are. I was doing a technical presentation the other day and I was sort of working through a strategy that had, you know, involved running a number of pensions. And I was talking to a group of advisors about how that would work. And the first reaction from the advisors was, oh, but that'd be such a pain. I'd have, you know, if I've got 4 pensions, I'd have 4 different accounts to manage. You know, the cash is coming in, the contributions are coming into the accumulation account. I've got to deal with that. You know, how do I get the pension payments out? And I was thinking, gosh, I'd never even thought about that. But that's not a problem in SMSFs. We don't think about that at all because the strategy doesn't need to be constrained by practical things like, you know, running 4 uniquely different accounts. So I suspect there's a whole lot of gold in the benefits SMSFs give people that we've probably not even been that vocal about if we started to get more vocal about it. I wonder if all of a sudden, Tim, your number of 3 million members in SMSFs looks realistic.
Okay, we might jump to another popular topic, SuperStream. So it has been a little bit controversial.
I've never heard the words popular and SuperStream in the same sentence, Tori, but I'm going to congratulate you there for doing exactly that.
So there you go, working in marketing can put a positive spin on anything. So obviously it has offered some benefits, but it, you know, has also been a double-edged sword, particularly when it comes to rollovers. So I'd love to know your thoughts on it, whether it's longer term going to help or hinder growth in SMSFs. And Christopher has also asked a really compelling question around, obviously, as many people are, he's finding SuperStream incredibly clunky, and particularly with rollovers, and they don't understand where the roadblock is and whether it can be addressed. So if you can maybe discuss more broadly, I guess, impact of SuperStream longer term, and then maybe we'll jump back into Christopher's more specific question. Meg, did you want to take the lead? I know you love SuperStream.
You're welcome, Meg.
I might just kick off by profoundly agreeing with Christopher. Look, I think SuperStream is a great concept, and one of the things it should have, could have, is helping SMSFs with is rollovers in from large funds. I think where I'm finding, in our practice, we're finding SuperStream particularly problematic is the rollovers out. And that's partly because there's a whole behavioural change required if we're going to use SuperStream as the mechanism to get rollovers from SMSFs out to public offer funds, which is inevitable in some cases, right? You know, some people will die with their SMSF, but plenty of people will get to a point where they've done everything they can with their SMSFs. The balance is shrinking. They're getting older. The person who was really engaged in running it has died. So it's time to end that journey and roll out to a public offer fund. That's where we're finding it particularly problematic with those rollovers out. All the things that accountants and trustees and administrators and advisors are used to doing to make life simple to roll out just don't work with SuperStream. So Peter, I'm hoping you're going to solve all of those problems for us.
Thanks, Meg. Look, we do have regular conversations with the APRA fund representatives, so we are meeting monthly with the APRA funds, essentially the administrators of those large funds, to try and solve some of these issues. Look, I still believe long-term super stream is a good thing for the sector. Unfortunately, it was designed to speed up rollovers, and what are we now, 7-8 months in from when it first started, and we haven't seen that it has sped up rollovers between our respective sectors. But I think what's encouraging from our perspective is that the APRA funds representatives that we're talking to are just as keen and motivated to solve some of these issues so that we can get the money flowing between our sectors as efficiently as we can. Some of the things that we're talking to these representatives about are making sure that we've got consistency in the proof of identity documents that the APRA funds need. These things, they have anti-money laundering and CTF requirements that sit above super streams, so they will require documentation to identify the client, and they have to do that under their AML CTF obligations. But what we're trying to do is get consistency so that all the APRA funds require the same documents. About 95% of them do, but there are some outliers, and some of those outliers tend to be some of the larger funds, larger APRA funds. So we're talking to the representatives at the moment, trying to get consistency, so at least we know what documents are required. And the other bugbear that we're coming across is that some of these funds require hard copies of certified bank statements, so they want them sent in the mail. So we're trying to move away from that. So at least we've got electronic, they'll accept electronic documents. So, we're trying to work through those things, which I think will make a difference in terms of streamlining things. But there has been a number of teething issues, there's no doubt. And I don't think there's a week go by where we don't get some type of complaint from one of our members about SuperStream. Just a good example that we keep coming across is the daily limits that banks impose on money being transferred out. So picking up on Meg's point about money from self-managed super funds going to APRA funds, some banks have a daily limit on how much can be transferred, and which means you've got to do it in multiple tranches, which doesn't comply with the SuperStream standards. So there's those issues which hopefully would have got picked up during the testing phase, which weren't, and now we're trying to work through all those issues. So long story, but I'm still of the view that it will be good for the industry, and we're working through as many of the issues as we can.
So before we move off it, Peter, Stella's just raised a point of clarification. So she's said we've found the only way to meet the 3-day rollover payment timeframe is to actually do a bank check from the SMSF. And I guess she's just asking, are there any other suggestions or hints and tips around that?
So that is a requirement of the APRA fund by the sound of things, so that's what they're asking for. But that's not a SuperStream requirement. Obviously, that's outside the SuperStream way of doing things.
Or maybe it's because of the 3-day requirement, and that bank transfer limits might cap the amount. So if you want to do it all, do the whole amount, you need a bank check.
Okay.
I haven't heard of too many funds doing a bank check, I must admit. But that would be a shame, wouldn't it? Like, that would be totally counter to the whole idea of SuperStream, which was designed to be, let's leverage the great technology we all have to make transfers frictionless. I think we've got a lot more pain to go there before we solve that one.
Yeah, look, I'd agree. I don't think there's anything I can come up with at this point. That's certainly not the way SuperStream's system is supposed to work. So it is, a little disappointing to hear that that's what's required to meet the the needs of the funds.
Okay, so we might change topics again. Tim, there has been a lot of talk around the power of data and the capabilities required, particularly from a data perspective, to remain competitive and deliver on customer experience expectations going forward. I know with your consulting work, no doubt that's a topic that you've touched on in the past as well. Specifically for our industry, obviously the ongoing requirement around more and high quality data feeds. I'd love to hear the data capabilities that you feel we'll need going forward, and some of, how it touches on things like competitiveness, customer experience, etc.
Yeah, thank you, Tori. Well, and I think certainly there is, again, a macro theme about consumers' expectations in the quality and accessibility of their data, and their capacity to use that data to help them make better decisions, which I think is key and part of our responsibility to support our partners to be able to take that data in a very efficient way and use that to help them fulfill their responsibilities in a compliant and efficient way, and to be able to then present that data to clients in a way that helps them understand their situation and, as I said, make better financial decisions. So there is undoubtedly a thing that we have to respond to. We know, and the feedback I've had in sort of the 2 weeks that I've been in the role is that the quality of APIs are critical for our clients and our capacity to be able to deliver APIs to support some of the client experiences that our partners want to be able to deliver are critical. We have, I think, in recognition and understanding of how important data is, actually created a role on my leadership team that has responsibility for data feeds and efficiency. So a GM of data is part of the mandate that this team has, and we've got some deeply experienced people. Certainly, Tom, who's leading that team, has done this in other institutions over many, many years. And I think our job is to help ensure we can improve the quality of data for both end clients as well as our partners, to help improve the efficiency of the way in which they deliver their advice and solutions to clients and give them a better experience at the same time.
I think a lot of us on this call, Tim, would say data feeds, data feeds, data feeds. We love them. And in fact, I think I was talking before about, SMSFs and retail funds had created some great competitive tension that basically meant we ended up with better solutions for superannuation members. I wonder if one of the things that's driven SMSFs to leverage data feed capability and do more real-time processing and having everything up to date is because is competitive tension working the other way in the sense that was a great, I think that's something that retail funds really brought to the fore, possibly because they were the vehicle of choice for advisors who were advising in real time and needed to know where a client's affairs were up to, how much have they contributed, and how much of their pension have they taken, and all those kinds of things. So advisors sort of drove that level of or that requirement for retail funds, and then naturally expected something similar in SMSFs. And I think a lot of businesses, ours included, have moved over the last 20 years from being very much a give us your books and records at the end of the year and we'll do something for you, to look, we pride ourselves on being able to give you something that's reasonably up to date a lot of the time. I hope we don't go too far and get into this world of almost what I'd call fake accuracy. Yes, you can press a button and your industry fund can tell you precisely today how much you'd get if you rolled out, but you're just one of 1 million members of that industry fund. It's not an exact number. They know that, but it doesn't matter that it's not an exact number. It's what they'll give you if you leave, because you're only one of 1 million members. In an SMSF, everything is just so much more transparent. There's only 1 or 2 members. So how much is in my SMSF for me today? Well, I actually don't know, and there's no point in knowing. I know roughly, and that's pretty good. But it's probably another reason SuperStream is such a challenge for SMSFs. Quantifying somebody's balance right now, today, this instant, even with the best data feeds in the world, is difficult to the point of being unrealistic. You can just know pretty well what the investments are worth. Can you necessarily know exactly what tax refunds or whatever else are coming? Not necessarily today.
I think you made some good points there, Meg, and I think it's relevant to TBAR reporting. We are now moving to quarterly reporting, which we're prepared to support, but we wouldn't like to go further than that and get to the point where the APRA funds are reporting daily, those type of things. We don't think that's appropriate in the self-managed super fund sector for the reasons that you've just outlined. There's an expectation that the amount is accurate in an SMSF. You can't use these approximates figures like the APRA funds do. So
it'd be absolutely fine to have TBAR reporting in real time as long as an estimate was good enough. Yeah. Which is really what you're getting from an APRA fund.
Agree. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So time's flown quickly. We're starting to get to the pointy end now. So I might ask each of you to share your perspective on what you believe the biggest challenge is on the horizon for our industry, really what everyone on the call, should be thinking about now. And I guess also on the flip side, how we can work together as an industry potentially to address that. So Peter, did you want to kick off?
Yeah, look, I think in terms of challenges, we've got some looming compliance challenges, if you like, with the director IDs, and I noticed that was referred to in the report. So that 30 November date is coming up very quickly. We know around 65% of SMSFs have corporate trustees, so the directors of those corporate trustees will be required to obtain that director ID if they were a director as at the 31st of October last year. What's got me, I guess, concerned is that a significant proportion of those companies will be special purpose companies that are set up for the sole purpose of acting as a trustee of an SMSF, and it may not be apparent to those individuals that they do need to obtain a director ID. So we need to continue to do what we can to educate our clients about the need to get those director IDs. I think in terms of some of the other challenges, we are seeing a spike in SMSF establishments, but we need to be careful that we've got the right people setting up SMSFs for the right reasons. And I think, Meg, you mentioned it in some of your statements in the report, that we've got to be careful that we're not getting individuals just a knee-jerk reaction to what they perceive to be underperformance in their APRA funds. They need to have a plan so that they are better off when they retire. And so, we can help to reduce instances of where SMSFs have been set up inappropriately by giving access to advice, to ensuring individuals have access to quality advice around self-managed super funds. We have come a long way over the last decade in terms of the quality of SMSF advice that's now available to consumers, but we've still got some way to go and before everyone has access to the advice, the quality of advice that they need. So they're the challenges that I see. I see the quality of advice review as an opportunity for the industry here to engage with government and try and remove some of these obstacles which are preventing clients from getting access to affordable advice. From our perspective, from the association's perspective, from an advice framework point of view, if we can have a framework which differentiates between strategy and product advice, we think that's important. That makes it easier for advisors to give scoped and scaled advice, and also recognises and allows accountants to give some advice, some limited advice around self-managed super funds if they're qualified to do so, and it's integral to the tax advice they're providing. If we can get those settings right, we'll go a long way to meeting the unmet needs of many of these clients.
I think you're right, Peter, that if there's one challenge we've really got to rise to, I think it's getting the advice settings right, and I'm so glad that's not my problem, because this, yes, and separation of product from strategy is absolutely key in SMSFs, because so much of the product choice really does sit with the member. They choose where they're going to invest, but where they need help is in the strategy and in the compliance, and we don't want this challenging grey area where highly qualified and capable people feel unable to help a client who's got a simple problem cost effectively. And that's probably that theme probably translates through to my other, the biggest challenge I see that I think, again, we can rise to, and that is to be in a position where people are not frightened to explain some of the extremely attractive reasons that you have an SMSF. I think when you just dumb it down to flexibility and control, everybody immediately leaps to investment flexibility and assumes that if I never want to do non-mainstream things, I don't need an SMSF. But there's just a myriad of aspects to flexibility and control that I think are really undervalued. And I'd love to see us feeling confident to be more, bold about saying so.
I think I'd add to those comments. I think for us, it sort of builds on both Meg and Peter's perspective. It's what role can we play in supporting the industry to ensure that we retain this really privileged position we have in the market, build on our reputation, ultimately deal with some of those advice issues, some of the perceptional issues around complexity and other matters that Meg's touched on, but to ultimately grow the overall SMSF market in a way that is right for the end consumer, that they're making good choices about their long-term financial well-being, but recognises that there are different ways in which consumers want to engage in these types of solutions of super, and we have to ensure that we do that without blowing this up on the way through. And so it's if you like, the compliant growth and expansion of SMSFs as a viable solution and a very credible solution for the right clients who want choice and control. And we're seeing, as I said earlier, I think that's a more macro trend across other consumer groups of people wanting to take control of their long-term financial well-being.
And as it grows, we should expect that the regulator, whose only means of regulating these things is to make sure that they report on time, we should expect that the regulator is going to just focus more and more on timeliness of reporting. And that's none of us like it, but it's a reasonable response to, that's the tax office's window in to whether these funds are doing sensible things or crazy things. So we shouldn't be surprised when that happens. We just need to make sure we're ready for it.
Fantastic. So I know from my perspective, it's been really refreshing to hear the alignment across the industry. Obviously, with you all have different perspectives, but I think the common thread is how we're all working together to grow the market, whether it's through technology decreasing costs, increasing accessibility, targeting new younger segments, or even just leveraging some of those demographics around wanting that more control in turbulent socioeconomic times. I think the way we're coming together as an industry, you know, as demonstrated in today's call is fantastic. So thank you to Peter, Meg and Tim for sharing their expertise and their insights and making the time for us today. Really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who joined the call, and particularly those that asked such insightful questions as well. Appreciate the engagement. For those that haven't received their email, don't forget you can download your benchmark report via the class website after the session as well. We have recorded the session and we'll make it available via the class website at a later date as well. So thank you to everyone for joining. It's a great session and I know I really enjoyed it. Have a great day.
Thanks, Tori. Thanks, Peter. Thank you, Meg.
Pleasure. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.